Before we begin today's episode, please be advised that this conversation includes sensitive topics such as sex addiction, pornography, and suicide. Listener discretion is advised. In this episode, we sit down with licensed therapist and podcast host Duane Osterlind for a powerful and vulnerable conversation about addiction, grief, healing, and the personal stories that shape our paths. What led you to pursue therapy as a career, and how did your own recovery journey at 17 shape that path?
Oh, that's a big question. Um, you know, uh, I started doing therapy as a second career. I actually worked in the film industry in the beginning of my life, and that's actually my first degree is in radio, television, and film. But I wasn't very good at it. It was good in certain ways, but it really wasn't a fit for me. And I stumbled into the marriage and family therapy world. I was working on a film set and I tripped over some cables and I broke my ankle and I was on disability. And I'm usually not one to sit around and just not do anything. And it was summer and I thought, well, maybe, I've always been interested in psychology. Maybe there's a class I can take. I'm on disability. I can't work. I can hobble around. And so I went to the university, Cal State Long Beach, and I talked to Vince, who was the dean at the time in the marriage and family therapy department. I didn't really know what I was asking or what I was doing, and I talked to him for about an hour, and he said, I have a class, a weekend class for the next 6 weeks. I'll make a space for you in it. And I was like, okay, well, I'll let you know. Let me think about it. And I thought about it, and then I think that was on a Monday, and on Wednesday it started that weekend. I said, yeah, I'll do it, and I'll take it. I'm not working. It's 6 weeks. I have 6 weeks of disability. I'll take this class, and I took it, and I just really, really enjoyed it. It was fascinating to me. And so I decided after I took that class, God, I'd like to take another one. And I started to do that. And then that started conflicting with working in the film industry and taking jobs in the film industry. And slowly over time, I realized like I really want to pursue this and I really like this. And so it was probably about a 2-year process of letting go of my first career and moving into this career and getting a master's in marriage and family therapy. And so that was the process of how I got into it and really kind of began to understand that this was what I wanted to do. I really enjoyed it and I had a passion for helping people and also at the same time wanting to understand myself, right? And I think if you pursue the therapy field, there's a part of you also doing this work to figure out yourself, and that comes back to the earlier part of your question is like, how did my own journey start? I was in rehab when I was 17. I struggled with depression and suicidality, and and so that was very formative to me. And I had that experience. And I think as I did this in a second career, I was a little more mature to be able to look back on that experience and take that into my current work and those kind of fit together. I think if we're working in the mental health field, there's a part of us that wants to understand ourselves as well as we do this work. So there's a twofold thing, helping people, but also I wanted to understand what made me tick too. Like, why did I do the things I do? Why did I make the choices I made? Um, to be able to understand that better and to understand myself better.
And what stuck with you from that experience that still informs how you connect with your clients today?
Are you talking about the experience as being a 17-year-old in rehab? And
Yes.
yeah, I think first of all, I would say that there's help out there. That I was lucky enough to be in a space where I had enough of a support around me to help me through that time and how critical that support was, but that there was support out there and there was help. I think another also important lesson I learned is that everybody's pain is relative to them. and that no matter how small we think our pain might be, it's still our pain. And it's important to be able to respect that across the board, right? That
Mm.
um, if we're suffering and we need support. And so I think that was probably one of the big things I took away from that, and also understanding what it's like to be vulnerable, what it's like to be in that position where you are in a lot of pain or anxiety or depression and you need support. So when people can come and see me and do this work, in some ways I've also been there. So it helps me have compassion. It helps me be empathetic. It helps me rally with them and give them hope that there's something on the other side. Because when we're in that darkness, when we're um, in that suffering, sometimes that feels like all there is, and we can't see the other side. And so I think being able to help them or hold that hope for them while they're in that suffering um, can help them get to that other side, to be able to see it. And they can see that their change is possible.
You work with some deeply sensitive issues. What are some key things people misunderstand about sex addiction or betrayal trauma?
That's a good question. I think a lot of, and I think this is I think this is in addiction in general, is that it's very mistaken as this moral issue. And I don't want to say that people who are struggling with any of these issues don't do bad things. That is true. But understanding that oftentimes this is a trauma issue, that this is a biological issue, and being able to understand that we have to work on that stuff to be able to help someone through that process. And I think, unfortunately, um, people who are struggling with addiction often just get dismissed as having some kind of weak will. I don't think anybody chooses to be an addict. Nobody wants to be there. It's an awful experience, and everyone who is struggling with that always wants out. So
Mm.
to me, there's something else going on, and that's understanding us as human beings that these deeper traumas often start driving the bus. It doesn't mean we don't have to be responsible for our choices and our actions. We do. We have to take responsibility for that. But we also, at the same time, have to understand that there's something more going on than just uh, our own morality and willpower. It's bigger than that. And I think we have to appreciate that. And so, especially around issues around sex and sex addiction and compulsive sexual behavior, I think that oftentimes is very misunderstood of what that actually is and how is that an addictive process for people.
What role does mindfulness play in your approach to therapy?
I love mindfulness. I was introduced to mindfulness when I first started this work, as I was saying earlier, when I was um, just beginning this career change. I had a colleague that introduced me to a book by John Kabat-Zinn. He's a kind of one of those big leaders in the mindfulness movement. And I remember reading his book, and it just really struck with me that how we can be present in this moment and how mindfulness can help us with our emotion regulation. When we can be mindful and sit non-judgmentally with ourselves in the present moment, we can open ourselves up to understand ourselves. We can understand our reactions. We can understand uh where we are in the world when we can practice mindfulness. And that's once again, that's that, being able to be present non-judgmentally in this moment, just have that awareness. And I give as we do that, that gives us a space to have room to explore ourselves and respond rather than react. And so, um, I'm also a big fan of dialectical behavior therapy, and dialectical behavior therapy, one of its core tenets is mindfulness. So being present with where you are, being present with the environment, both internally and externally. What am I experiencing internally? What's happening around me? And not getting caught up in the emotional experience itself, being able to watch that experience. And what I love about mindfulness is that this is a skill we can learn to do. This is something we can learn to grow and cultivate within ourselves. So it's very doable. It's not you're able to do it or you're not do it. It's a skill. You can learn to be mindful and you can
Mm-hmm.
practice mindfulness. So I love that because it's a practical intervention that then sets the foundations for so many other therapeutic processes.
When someone comes in with a mix of trauma, addiction, and relationship struggles, where do you begin? How do you help people untangle it?
Hmm, that's a good question. I think, everybody's unique when they come in. So it's really important to be able to pay attention to them, where they're at in their process in that moment, to be able to help them and where their crisis is in that moment. So if they're in immediate crisis, we may have to respond to that right now, right here. If they're in a different space where they're now looking at their trauma in a different way, they're not in crisis, that's a different set of interventions. And then it also depends on what kind of trauma they're coming in with.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm dealing with betrayal trauma, well, when you deal with sex addiction a lot, you have different people that are um, impacted by that. And so you have the person themselves who is struggling with compulsive sexual behavior. And then you have the intimate partner that is now impacted by that discovery of that infidelity or that compulsive sexual behavior. And there's two different kinds of trauma going on in that system. You have the person who has the compulsive behavior that they have to, work on to be able to control, to be able to put a stop to, and they have to work on their own trauma that probably exacerbated that that coping mechanism as using sex as a primary way to cope. And then you have the partner who's now devastated because their reality is completely turned upside down and they don't know what to do. And so you have to help them through that. And that's its own treatment treatment protocol as well. Often for partners who have been betrayed in this way, they are experiencing post-traumatic stress. They become hypervigilant. They almost just don't. They feel like they're going crazy because they can't stop thinking about the issue at hand.
Mm-hmm.
They can feel so overwhelmed and devastated by this, and there's this all of these trauma symptoms that go there. And not only that, they have a person who they're supposed to trust has been lying to them. So they get stuck in a really, really difficult situation where the very person that they trust is the one who's betrayed them. And so they don't know where to go, right? They go over to that partner, but then they learn that that partner has betrayed them. Then they move away. And, it can be completely overwhelming. And then you have the person who's done the betrayal and, their compartmentalization of the problem has now collapsed and their world is collapsing too, right? Because of the consequences of their behavior and their choices. And they
Mm-hmm.
realize oftentimes, I've just devastated the person I care about by my choices. And that might sound weird to be able to say, how could you do that to someone you care about? But when you're dealing with addiction, as I was saying earlier, you know, oftentimes trauma is driving the bus in a lot of these choices. You still have to be responsible for them and take accountability to them, but you have to understand all that. So there's a lot that goes on in helping a system that has been impacted by compulsive sexual behavior, infidelity, betrayal. It's quite a big undertaking.
What what do you say to those excuse me, who there's some who think that sex addiction is not a real addiction, and then there are others who categorize it as an addiction. What would you say to those who think that it's not an addiction?
Yeah, that debate has been going on for a long time. You know,
Mhm,
when I'm looking at someone who's struggling with compulsive sexual behavior, I'm looking for three main categories, right? And this is the way I define it. Is that the person uses sex as their primary way of coping with distress. This is where they go to when they can either they get themselves into that sexual state. They no longer have to feel sadness, loneliness, hurt, pain, rejection, shame, whatever it is, because their body is in a different state. So they're using it as a primary way of coping. The next thing is that they have made efforts to stop. They have tried, there's a part of them realizing this behavior is not good for me and I need to stop. So they have failed efforts to stop that behavior. So they've tried to in the past. Maybe they haven't reached out to anybody, but they've made promises to themselves. They've tried to change this, they've tried to change that, and they find themselves always going back to that sex as their primary way of coping. And then thirdly, they continue to do it despite consequences. So they experience consequences from these choices and they keep doing it. And so when I'm looking at it from that perspective, that's how I would say when we say compulsive sexual behavior or hypersexual behavior or sex addiction, I know there's debates on a lot of these terms. I think there's not a debate that sex can become very problematic for people, and there's an element of compulsivity to it. I don't think that's really in debate. I think what's in debate is what do we call it? How do we name it? It's a complex uh, set of behaviors and choices being informed by a lot of different things. So I think more to me, it's about that. And each label we choose has pros and cons to it. Um, and so, we have to think about that. But I don't really think the debate is this a real issue or not? It's an issue. I think that's pretty definitive across the board that there are people out there that struggle with controlling their sexual behavior in a way that is compulsive to them. Now, do you want to call it compulsive? We can argue what that is exactly, or
mhm,
hypersexual, or out of control, or addiction. But the issue at hand is there are people out there struggling with this.
right. Do you think that there's any correlation between someone who has a porn addiction, someone that has a sex addiction? I mean, could that lead to a sex addiction, or is it just two separate addictions?
Well, I think that's a really, really good question. And when I look at this on a broad scale, I look at sexual arousal as the way of escaping pain, suffering,
Okay.
right? Whether it's porn, you know, or whether it's sex with people, whatever, with other people, or however that is going to take place. But it's about that I need to change my nervous system. I I can't sit with myself as is, and I have to change how I experience myself in this moment. And now the person isn't necessarily consciously aware of that as they're doing it, because this has become habituated. It's become, this is the way I go, right? I use this all the time. So there's that statement. Now, when we look at porn, I think what we're seeing and what I've seen as well, as the internet has come along and access to pornography has become more and more available to people, it's just on your phone, a click away. And there's younger and younger exposure to pornography. I think last time I heard some of the statistics is the average age of a person being exposed to online pornography is like 10, which is,
Wow, that's really young.
which is, you think about it, a 10-year-old being exposed to, um, uh, that kind of material when their brain isn't at a developmental stage to handle it. We're seeing a lot of younger people come in who present very differently than what you would consider the classic sex addict person who came in, who didn't grow up on pornography that way, right? Maybe they had some exposure to it, but it
Hmm.
wasn't high-speed internet porn, right? So
Right.
I think there are some differences, and we're learning what those differences are. Unfortunately, I've had very young people come in, 23-year-olds come in because porn is overtaking their life and they can't have relationships, or they can't even have sex anymore because they can't get an erection without pornography. And they've had, their brain has been exposed to this pornography from such a young age. And we're just starting to see some of the impact of that longer term, like how that impacts people's brains and all of that stuff. But we see a lot of people coming in. And when I first started this, working in this field, almost 20 years ago, didn't see a lot of these younger people coming in. Now I see it a lot more often. And they don't present the same way. They don't, when they came in before, there might have been a lot of, with the classic sex addict, there might have been a lot of shame around it and all of that. These younger people coming in, there's not that same kind of shame about like, oh my gosh, I'm being sexual in this way and this isn't, I'm bad or whatever. It's more like this is just taking over my life. And I can't seem to stop. It's like this habit, and I keep going back to this, and I don't want to do it, and I'm wasting my time looking at porn all day or in every free moment I have. Why is it? I can't stop. It keeps showing up, right?
Wow.
So we're dealing with a lot of like, one of the ideas is that with online pornography is the novelty of it. Our brains are wired for novelty. And so, when you looking at internet porn, it's like picture after picture. It's a constant novelty. So the brain stays in this highly aroused state over and over and over again, to just deplete the dopamine in the brain. It's just like overstimulated. Yet to feel normal, you've got to keep that stimulation going. And so there's a lot of work on that. They're looking at what that is and how that all works, but definitely problematic for a lot of people.
Hmm. So moving on to your podcast.
Sure.
You've been podcasting since 2017.
Yeah. Yeah.
What inspired you to create the Addicted Mind, and how has it evolved over the years?
Yeah. That's a great question. Well, I always loved podcasts. So I was probably one of those first people that, got onto podcasts. I love listening to people talk about interesting things. So I was always into it. And as a, uh, you know, working in the mental health field, I thought, oh, this would be a great topic to do, and also would be a great way to had a group practice at the time to be able to market my group practice and have people find us, and then it would just be interesting to do it. And then, but as I've done it, and I've done it since 2017, I can't believe I've been doing it that long, but it's a long time. It's just I really fell in love with the process because I got to interview such amazing people on the podcast, just people in the addiction space, which is also what I'm interested in. So the Addicted Mind enabled me to interview some amazing people that have amazing stories of strength, courage, hope. That's part of it. And then also interview some amazing researchers and scientists and alternative therapies that are out there. And I love meeting these people and talking to them. They're inspiring. And so I just keep doing it because I love it. And I think it also helps people, um, it helps people get this information in a way that they can understand it. So there's so much great information out there about addiction that people just don't know about. Going back to what you were talking about earlier, just people not knowing some of the assumptions about addiction and just willpower, and that it's just this moral issue, and being able to see that it's much more complex than that. But
Mm-hmm.
there's also a lot of hope out there in forms of different kinds of treatments. When we look at the some of the medications that can now help with addiction, the studies on some of the new GPL-1 inhibitors. And, I had a researcher on recently talking about their researching in semaglutide, and does this work with addiction, because they're finding, they're giving this, semaglutide to individuals who are struggling with obesity, and they're also drinking, and then they take this drug and then they stop drinking. And then, why is that?
Wow.
We don't even know what's going on there. So they're doing a lot of research. Like, does this actually help with addiction, and can that be positive and stuff? And, also, so all the medications, and then also just other people who have come through the other side of it, right? They've been there, they've been in that dark space. People who have been homeless, lost everything, and have been able to turn that around and get into recovery, and share what they did, what worked for them that got them there. And sometimes, a lot of people reach out to me, and it's like a voice of hope, because when you're in that darkness, when you're in that space, it just, you can just feel lost. You can feel a lot of shame. You can feel broken. You can feel like a failure. And you can hear these people. It's like, I was there too, and this is what I did to get to the other side. And that's inspiring. And I love meeting people and talking to people. So it evolved into its own thing. And then in the last year, we added another element to the Addicted Mind, called the Addicted Mind Plus. And I
I saw
thought,
that.
yeah, I thought, I'm interviewing all these experts, but also people want help and support directly. So the
Mm-hmm.
Addicted Mind Plus is an offshoot. It's our second episode, and it's short, and it's maybe 15 minutes. And it deals with like one thing you can work on in that moment, one small step. And we pull in different therapies like dialectical behavior therapy, or ACT therapy, or CBT therapy, or positive psychology, or all these tools out there that you can then apply to yourself. And that's been really exciting to see too, because people can download the worksheet, work on it, and work on themselves. And so that's super exciting. I love that we're doing that as well.
Yeah,
It's
that's
like
a good addition.
giving back to everybody, and stuff. And what moves me on too is, you just get the thank yous from people
Mm-hmm.
who maybe in that moment of darkness, they reach out and they just, say thank you to, to listening to the podcast. Sometimes you record these podcast episodes and they go out into the podcast world, and you have no idea who's listening to them or who's hearing them. And then all of a sudden you get this email thanking you for putting this information out there, or how it changed their life in some way, or how this episode shift shifted the trajectory they were on. And that's really rewarding. I love that.
Well, yeah, because it's like saying what I'm doing. It's it's important because it's
Yeah.
actually helping somebody.
Yeah, it's actually helping people. And so I love reading the reviews. I love knowing that, because sometimes you can feel a little isolated as you do this. You don't,
Mm-hmm.
you don't see the direct result of somebody always listening to your podcast, but it's nice to see that happen, and people, you know, get that benefit from it.
Right. So your podcast blends professional insights with real stories.
Mhm.
How do you strike that balance between clinical information and emotional storytelling?
Um, I don't think that you can walk through suffering and pain without experiencing that or expressing that. That's an important part to me. A lot of times when I interview these experts that come on and maybe even researchers, they're not therapists themselves, but they're researchers on these topics. I really want to know what motivated you to want to look into this. Like, why? Why
Hmm.
did you choose to study X? Because there's a personal story there, right? There's a personal story. We don't go study something, I don't think, if it doesn't have some interest to us. There's something personal about it. We
Right.
have to do that. We don't do this because we're just going to do it, right? And I want to know that story too, because I think that's just as important as the actual outcome of the research. Why did you need to know this piece of information, right? So when researchers come on, um, you'll hear the stories, right? The stories of, well, someone in my family struggled with this, or this is what I saw, or this is the experience I had that led me down this path to want to know this piece of information that might help others because it'll also help me. Um, I think that's fascinating, and I love that.
Have you noticed any changes in how people are talking about addiction and recovering since you started the podcast?
I think that I think people are much more open now to mental health than they used to be. There's still a lot of stigma, um, and at times I think we can go a little bit backwards in understanding that, where we can get back to those. Well, people just need to get back to willpower and just make a choice, right? And try and break it
Hmm.
down and make it simple. I think that's easy. But generally speaking, I think people are more open to getting help, getting support, uh, understanding that support is out there as we progress and advocate for this. Is there enough help and support out there? No. We need we need much more, right? We're in a mental health crisis, and we need more support. So my hope is like the addicted mind does that. It's like another resource for people as well, because it's hard to get mental health support too. But I think people are open to it. They want it.
I and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of the people don't want to say anything. Like they don't want to ask for help because they're afraid of being judged or sometimes even they might want to like be in that misery.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's truth to that, right? There is truth that you may be judged, right? Someone out there, but those people that are judging you, they don't matter. Find the people that are going to support you, right?
Right.
I don't want to pretend that people there isn't a stigma around addiction. There is. There's a ton of there's still a lot of stigma around it. I think it's getting better slowly,
Hmm.
but there's some reality to that. And but I would say is that there are people out there that will help you and support you and can be there for you. Um, Try not to let your shame stop you from getting that support. Reach out. There's people that care about you. They understand your story. They understand what you're going through. I mean, just go to the podcast and look at all the guests that I've had on there. All
Hmm.
of them, right? Who have these stories reached out for help. Every single one of them. None of them did it on their own. None of them. Did. We don't heal on our own. Somehow along the line, They reached out for help and asked for support. And if you're out there struggling and you're having a hard time, see if you can summon the courage and do it. There are people out there that will support you. And yeah, there might be people out there that will not be nice about it, but you can't worry about them.
Isn't that the rule about like wanting to get help? It's like you have to want the help as opposed to family and friends pushing you to get the help.
Um, I think there's some nuances to that. What I would say is, yeah, if you want to change, you have to want to change. No one can force you to change. What I would say is that, for family members who have someone who's struggling with addiction, um, realizing that you can have boundaries around that and also be supportive of someone who's struggling, right? Being able to strike that balance.
Mhm.
Um, we definitely know that, if someone is forced into treatment in some way or coerced into treatment, they don't have as high as a success rate as people that are invited into treatment, that are encouraged and they make the choice themselves to go into treatment. And we can help set that stage in that way so that the person can get to that choice faster, right, than trying to be pushed into treatment. I think being pushed into treatment doesn't always have a successful outcome. I think there's a way to invite people into treatment to get support and to get help. Because ultimately, most people in addiction want that help and support in some way or another.
Right. Mm. So, what keeps you grounded and inspired, especially when you're supporting others through tough emotional territory?
Mm. What helps me keep grounded and inspired? I think doing my own work, right? I'm a human being. I have emotions, I have feelings. I have to keep doing my own work and asking for the support as I'm telling other people to go get help and support. I have to do the same thing, right? I have to get help and support and knowing that. And definitely I'm better at that than I was in the beginning of my life. But, I have to do the same thing. I have to do the same thing for my own mental health and work on my mental health and continue that journey. And I think what's inspiring, I mean, there's two things inspiring. You see people who've gotten to the other side. And then what I love is when I work with people, seeing them get to the other side, especially when you're dealing with compulsive sexual behavior and betrayal, which is my specialty, which is what I do,
Hmm.
seeing individuals and couples get to the other side and heal through that process, that has been, that's inspiring because I know that hope is out there. I know change is possible. Been able to see it in my own life, and I've been able to see it in the life of others, and I've been able to see it in the lives of the people I interview on my podcast. Right. So that's inspiring that change is always possible.
You just have to want it.
Yeah, you have to want it on a certain level. Yeah.
All right. And finally, how can people connect with your work, whether they're seeking help or just want to learn more?
Well, if they want to learn more about me, they can go to theaddictedmind.com. Check it out. They can check out the podcast and there, if they want to get a hold of me, there's a contact form there. They can fill that out and love to hear from them. And yeah, go there. You can learn all about me and check out The Addicted Mind or whatever podcast app you're using. Right.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening. If this episode resonates with you, be sure to follow the show on Spotify and leave a rating and a review. It helps others find these conversations. You can also follow us on social media to stay connected. Drop a comment, share your thoughts, and let us know what podcasters you'd love to hear more about.